You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
With the globe sheltered in place over the last 6 months, many have been taking to liquid ways to pass the time. While bars have had to close in response to the coronavirus pandemic, though some are mixing cocktails for takeout, sales of alcohol from retail outlets have skyrocketed this year. Year-over-year growth rate for total off-premise alcohol dollar sales for the entire 25-week pandemic period ending August 22nd was up around 23%. And while beer and wine sales are up from last year in the U.S., it seems that people are increasingly turning to spirits during stay-at-home measures. Spirits in the U.S. shot up 26%, according to Nielsen. Wine sales went up 17% during the same time, and beer sales went up around 15%. All in all, alcohol sales have been the one few bright spots in a troubled economy. My guest today on The Luxury Item is Rodney Williams, President and CEO of Belvedere Vodka, a super premium vodka that's part of the LVMH group. Rodney is responsible for the development, growth, and business vision for the Belvedere brand. Most recently, he was the CMO for Moet Hennessy USA's portfolio of luxury champagne, wine, and spirits brands. He's here today to talk about how the pandemic has impacted Belvedere's business, emerging trends in the marketplace, shifting customer attitudes and behaviors, and the launch of Belvedere's new Made with Nature campaign. Welcome, Rodney. I'm thrilled to have you on The Luxury Item.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you, Scott.
I'm excited to have you on, and congratulations on the launch of the new Made with Nature campaign, and we'll get to talk about that in a little while, so it's really exciting.
Thank you.
We have a lot to talk about, but I want to kind of back up a little bit because your background is super interesting. You know, before you joined the wine and spirits business, you headed up the marketing team behind the launch of GM's OnStar innovation, and you started your career in brand management at Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson. So what was it like transitioning over to the wine and spirits business?
Well, of all the transitions I've done, and I also worked for .com, I worked for in biotech, I would say the wine and spirits transition was the most difficult because there wasn't just the history I had to read about, but you really have to develop a palate, and you can only do that experientially. So it's quite an encompassing investment. But I started out with Robert Mondavi, and they were sort of hit a stagnant point where the base of the business hadn't been growing for 4 years. And they were interested in bringing in a more traditional, someone with a traditional marketing background. Mm-hmm. And we got that moving, and the company ended up being acquired. I was brought over to Kendall Jackson Family Wines to ignite growth there. We did the biggest launch in their history around something that was sort of the antithesis of Kendall Jackson Chardonnay, which is very creamy and rich, but a Chardonnay that had just been aged in steel. And then Moet Hennessy invited me over to join the team to rekindle growth on the Hennessy brand. I've been with Moet Hennessy for the last 9 years as the parent organization of Belvedere Vodka.
Right, and which is part of LVMH.
Yes.
And you know, what stands out, there's a lot of things that stand out to me about LVMH, but during the outset of the pandemic, LVMH immediately mobilized on all fronts in the effort to fight the disease. You know, they converted production lines of its perfume and cosmetic brands to produce large quantities of hand sanitizer for the French health authorities, financed millions of surgical masks. And what impressed me most was they really were the first out there to put purpose before profit. I know Belvedere had, you know, all the houses had their role. What was Belvedere's role during the pandemic?
Yes, those were heady days, and we were all pressed into action. For Belvedere, the opportunity was to create high-proof spirit that could be used in hand sanitizers and for disinfectants in hospital settings. And believe it or not, we had a very hard time donating product to that cause. Poland has tremendous expertise in alcohol distillation. The city of Poznan in 1850 had 500 distilleries, if you can believe it, only about 50,000 people. Yeah. So long history of this. And as a result, the government is very, very stringent in terms of licenses. And we were licensed to produce only at a certain proof level and, only for consumption and not for medicinal purposes. So we worked hard for about a 5-week period to find a partner who would adequately be able to take our donation and make good use of it. And the partner turned out to be Michelin. Apparently in Poland, they make hand sanitizer. And with Michelin, we partnered also with Caritas, the largest charitable organization in Poland, to contribute disinfectant product to about 200 hospitals, first responders, and something that is sort of akin to our national reserve that serves the country in terms of emergencies.
So at the beginning, I was talking about, alcohol sales have really been one of the few bright spots in this troubled economy. And it just seems consumers have been stockpiling alcohol like toilet paper in their pantry during lockdown. How has Belvedere's volume growth fared during this period?
Yeah, we, knock wood, have done quite well, all things considered. Belvedere for a long time has been a staple of nightclubs and, of course, craft bars and upscale restaurants. So to have that sector close or be seriously handicapped during the pandemic was a big limitation. But what we've found is that, in times of crisis or difficulty, consumers sort of retreat to quality. They retreat to the brands that with which they're familiar. And Belvedere has done extremely well at retail and in e-retail and e-commerce as well. So overall, we year to date are in growth, knock wood, which is an incredible feat here in the U.S.
No question. And because it's interesting, during the beginning of the pandemic, we were finding that consumers who were loyal to, these well-known brands, all bets were off the table when they went grocery shopping. They were just looking for convenience and price and anything that was on the shelf. So it was, the trend with Belvedere was actually counter to what was going on in the grocery area. And it seems like, consumers, what you're saying is during this period, that consumers were opting for more quality, super premium and luxury spirits versus economy spirits for the most part.
Yes, the way we frame it is consumers are sort of interested in drinking less, but drinking better. So, they've been less active, unable to go out and hang out as they were previously, but they still have an interest in enjoying life and being social in their own immediate confines, and an interest then also in terms of quality. The other sort of evolution that we've seen as a result of the pandemic, particularly as it relates to luxury brands, is that the sense of status seems to be shifting away from, sort of badge value and quality and inspiration alone, to also needing to project something about what the brand stands for. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Belvedere, we've always been all natural. So Belvedere is just made with two primary ingredients, and that is rye and water. We distill it by fire, and that's it. There are no additives, there's no sugar added, there are no emulsifiers. And to be able to be transparent about our ingredients and that they are so simple really sort of fits this pandemic-induced interest in things that are natural and things that are readily understood.
Were you seeing the similar patterns across different demographic groups?
We are, and part of it is because there's such commonality
Yeah.
people are feeling in terms of being held in place. But the other part of it is that, and this is consistent with other recessions, is that when economic times are fraught, consumers want a sense of getting great value for their money. And so brands that are familiar, brands that have always stood for quality mean something, but brands that are also compatible with their own values also seem to do particularly well.
Yeah. I'm curious if you could find out what your outlook is on the global liquor industry. While the off-premise alcohol sales have been through the roof, all those on-premise growth drivers we were talking about, like restaurants and bars and nightclubs and outdoor events and even international travel, has really been kind of under pressure due to COVID. What is your outlook for the industry over the next few
Yeah,
years?
so all of the forecasts are that we are going to experience another wave of this, on top of the flu season to come this winter.
Right.
So we're not done with it, and probably until there is a vaccine that's proven, to be efficacious. But yet, there's still a human instinct to get together and to be social, and to enjoy alcohol beverages. So we remain optimistic. We think even with the on-premise, with restaurants being closed, the creativity that we're seeing in cities where they've carved out street space for restaurants, for outdoor dining, where they have allowed cocktails to be consumed, outside of the restaurant. So we're seeing lots of creativity from that standpoint, and certainly, in terms of at-home consumption. Making cocktails used to be really intimidating for consumers.
Right.
You thought you needed all the accoutrement and what recipe and do I have the right blend. And I guess because people have had quite a bit of time, we're getting a lot of feedback that consumers rather enjoy it. And we think that's going to be a sustaining trend, even post COVID-19.
So everybody's going to want to be Tom Cruise and cocktail.
I don't know about but
so speaking of creative, it seems like creative consumers have found ways to recreate this virtual bar life with Zoom cocktail parties and quarantinis. Digital drinking might not replace the traditional bar scene, but it's at least finding new ways to breathe life into social drinking. So how do you think the drinking culture has changed?
I think that's very true. And, we've also, from a demographic standpoint in the US, crossed the line where the millennials are now the biggest population cohort. And their value system is a little bit different from the older generations, the Gen Xers and the Boomers, in that they really, really, really do believe in drinking in moderation more. But they value nature and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, COVID's making us all think a lot about it and the power of nature. So that's why we're so excited about our campaign, Made with Nature,
right.
Which had been in development certainly before the pandemic.
Oh, I'm sure.
But it really just tells the story of Belvedere in terms of the simplicity of our ingredients. We draw post-Garai from just 8 agricultural sources in Poland. So we have 100% traceability. And there are not a lot of producers who can say that. And I think the other thing about Belvedere is that, we've always had this culture of what we call the power of the collective. The we, not the me, of teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also very appealing, particularly to younger adult consumers.
Yeah, I agree. Have you seen any other trends that have come out over the last 6 months?
Well, I think in addition to the home consumption, there's an openness to experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
We had developed a new vodka called Heritage 176. It's actually malted rye vodka.
Hmm.
So we take it's the way vodka was made up until the late 1800s. We roast the rye at 176 degrees Fahrenheit, hence the name, and without adding sugar, without adding anything other than the rye and the water, the malting adds a very distinct flavor profile, such that you have a great sipping vodka. So we went through a lot of hand wringing internally, Scott, when the pandemic started, because this was scheduled to launch in May, and
right.
things were shutting down in March, and we were thinking, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. But what we've since seen is that consumers, even at home, are really open to experimentation. And I think part of it is this openness that millennials have to trying what's new. So, the typical boomer drink consideration set was about 4 or 5 go-to drinks. And for millennials, the research says it can be 10 to 12. So there's a bigger consideration set, and it fits with this notion of experiencing new and different things and really seeking them out. And I think quite surprisingly, the pandemic is only fueling that.
So when you think about how you've navigated through these uncharted waters over the last 6 months, like what are some of the lessons that you've learned? Nobody expected this to happen.
Well, we certainly learned the value of communication. The interesting thing about our business is that our corporate offices are in New York City, but our distillery and the bulk of our team is in Poland.
Right.
So we had to over communicate to stay in touch with everyone as things were happening. But I think the big thing that we've learned coming out of this is that, this whole idea of status also requiring that brands stand for something. So I think we and many other brands have felt a sense of validation and encouragement to really stand for certain principles in the world. And for Belvedere, this philosophy of inclusion has been a pretty important part of our organization for a long time. At our distillery, on the production line, we're 50-50 male, female. We're 50-50 male, female in the management ranks, and then the executive level, we're 40% female.
That's great.
So and LGBTQI+, we have representation from the executive level on down. And I'm African American, not Polish,
Mm-hmm.
but warmly embraced by my Polish colleagues. It does speak to the idea that you can have a culture that really embraces, people from disparate backgrounds and perspectives, and come together and create something, magical and special. And I think this environment has really given a sort of boost to brands who might have been fearful or on the fence about really taking a bold step forward.
Yeah, and transparency is so important these days with companies. And, we're talking about millennials and interested in natural ingredients, but they're also interested in, peeking behind the curtain of the company to look at its makeup, et cetera.
Oh, absolutely. And even from a CSR standpoint, we're very proud of the fact that we cut CO2 emissions by 42% from 2012 to 2018, when we became the first distillery to win a green energy grant from the European Commission. And we're bringing online next year a biomass capture facility at the distillery, where we'll be able to take waste product, the heat generated from the distillation process, and create clean energy from it. such that our operations will be carbon neutral. And we will also, we're in discussions with figuring out how to connect to the local town grid in Girardot to provide electricity, which is currently supported by coal. So that's an important initiative, but I think as consumers become much more engaged about nature and the environment, these are the sorts of programs that they expect to see. And we've never before had interest in our work. We're co-founder of something called the Foundation for Local Environment Protection, which encourages local post-Garai development and nurtures long-term relationships with the agricultural sources. And we also convene something called the Raw Spirits Summit with the Technical University of Woosh, which is all focused on sustainable growth of post-Garai, where we bring farmers and scientists together to talk about the latest technology. And we produce a journal from it, a scientific journal every year. So these are things we would never mention in communications, pre-COVID, but now it's sort of relevant to have them discoverable for consumers because people increasingly feel that they're germane.
Yes. The vodka category is an interesting one, and it's very competitive. It's the largest spirits category, and I think it accounts for something like 1/3 of the market volume. Yeah. And you also have these more sophisticated drinkers these days, and consumers are approaching their food and drink choices in a more thoughtful and considered manner. So it seems that the brands that are real and differentiated in this category have a better chance to grow. So how does Belvedere differentiate itself in this complex market?
Yeah, no, great insight. We fully agree with you. So we differentiate ourselves in a couple of ways. First is that we are based on rye, and rye is difficult to grow and quite tricky to distill. So you find many more vodkas based on wheat or corn or potatoes versus rye. But rye imparts flavor. If you compare a slice of rye bread with a slice of white bread or even wheat bread, the rye is what really imparts flavor. Yes. And taste. And we think that is a real differentiator for Belvedere. The other factor for us is that being Polish-based, Poland was the first country to appellate or regulate vodka the way France, Italy, the US appellates and regulates wine, such that we are not allowed to put additives in vodka, where to some degree you can if you're producing elsewhere. So you won't find added sugar and emulsifiers in Belvedere. It's literally just the rye and the water. And I think those things really, really help differentiate us from other brands. And then lastly is, how we sort of show up in the world in terms of what it is that we do to give back, and part of that work in the programs I mentioned earlier was about this ethos we've always had to nourish the land we share. But the other part of it is, how we present ourselves. And we've long tried to have a very eclectic group of ambassadors who sort of represented a freedom to express oneself fully and creatively, even if it's different than how most other people express themselves.
Do you think the term imported, when it's on the label, is persuasive enough these days? And the country of origin?
Well, yes and no, and it probably depends on on the category. So if you look at something like whiskey, there are subcategories, you know, Scottish whiskey versus Irish whiskey versus Canadian or American. But, you know, in general, and particularly about the world of vodka, it's much more about the authenticity of the brand, where people are interested in the real backstory of the brand. And as there's depth to it, there's heightened interest. So in the case of Belvedere, we're produced in a distillery that is 110 years old. It's one of the oldest continuously operating vodka distilleries in the world. And, you know, Poland has a 600-year tradition of making vodka. There's long been a rivalry between Poland and Russia as to the true origins of vodka. But Poland rests its hat on the fact that in 1405, the first written record of vodka was consummated, and it was in
I did not know that.
Yep, it's in Polish. So the Poles, that's the Polish argument, and I'm sticking to it.
Last year, Belvedere joined forces with, you know, Grammy-nominated musician, actor, activist Janelle Monae on that limited edition bottle design, which was amazing. And there was a whole social and creative campaign that focused on opportunity and empowerment. So first of all, how did that partnership originally come about? Because I know that wasn't the first time you collaborated with her.
No, so that, yeah, we collaborated with her for a couple of years, and we approached her because part of our brand DNA is this power of the collective, working as a team. We don't have one master distiller, but actually a team of distillers who work together to create Belvedere. And, you know, in learning more about Janelle, she works with a creative team herself, called Wonderland, that's dedicated to crafting her music and, you know, charting her film projects. So her way of working was very attractive to us, as well as her powerful voice for amplifying the stories and the experiences of people whose stories don't always get told. So it was a very, very exciting collaboration for us, but she really embodied, we thought, and still think, this whole spirit of the power of the collective.
Yeah, it seemed like the campaign emphasized the importance of diversity, inclusion, positivity, and empowerment. And it's interesting. We're starting to see, you know, more luxury brands ramping up diversity and inclusion in their campaigns. So, you know, so being relevant across a diverse spectrum of audience is absolutely critical for the luxury industry. There's no question. And to me, diversity and inclusion are crucial for the future of the luxury industry. What are your thoughts on that?
Agreed. And, you know, you look at the demographic changes alone in the US, but it's more than that, Scott. I really think that, you know, this younger generation of consumers who are coming into their own now, really, you know, they've grown up on the internet, so they've been, you know, weaned in social media, and it's opened the world to them. So you don't have to live in New York or LA or some big media center to really have access to lots of ideas and imagery and music and trends. And so as a result, I think, you know, people are more open-minded and more open to change. And so I think we're going to see more of it, and we're going to see brands have to, in the luxury sector, be able to keep up and make statements and stand for something accordingly. One of the exciting things that we did, Belvedere, in this recent period, was to partner with an organization called Race Forward, which is really addressing from a policy standpoint issues of social justice. And you know, would we have done that 5 years ago? Probably not as easily, but Belvedere has always sort of been on a leading edge. We've been a part of Bono and his Red campaign,
Mhm.
to end HIV in Africa for the last 9 years. And of course, as part of Moet Hennessy, we donated during this period to the restaurateur and bartender guilds to really help those particular industries that we're so close to, that were severely impacted. So I think it is increasingly incumbent upon luxury brands to be relevant to consumers where they live and how they are experiencing the world in ways that we probably would not have given countenance to 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I know LVMH actually has. I think they have. I think they started it last year or 2 years ago. This inclusion index,
Uh-huh.
and it's recognizes diversity and inclusion initiatives throughout the group. So
Mhm.
as an organization itself, it's really committed to this.
Yes, and it takes monitoring and capturing progress to really be able to move forward. And LVMH is pretty proud in the U.S. that 50% of women in key company, 50% of people in key company positions are women. But LVMH started an initiative to include more women in senior roles 11 years ago. And the numbers weren't very good even 9 years ago when I joined. But the fact that it's been monitored and it's something that the company has a long-term ambition towards achieving is quite impressive.
Yeah, I know they've also talked about their commitment to environmental performance as really a strategic growth pillar. So,
Mm.
what are some of Belvedere Vodka's best practices when it comes to supporting sustainability? I know we touched upon it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so we're working, Scott, to remove plastics from what we do. It's going to be a long-term process, but we moved away from straws. We're figuring out how in promotional gift packs we can use less packaging. The materials that we use are recyclable. And again, we've taken some of the packaging out of the shippers themselves. So in addition to the CSR work and the green energy work, it's also about lifestyle work and practicing at every touch point, bringing those values of protecting the environment to fruition.
So, your CSR mission is to nourish the land we share.
Yeah, one of the exciting things that we'll be embarking on in the months to come is that rye and some of the byproducts from harvesting rye can be used as a regenerative agent for replenishing depleted topsoil of key nutrients. So we're partnering with an environmentally focused, agriculturally focused nonprofit organization to help farmers, and particularly farms where the topsoils have been eroded or declined, to rejuvenate them. So we're finding, as we scratch the surface of this, there's just more and more ways in which we can work to collectively with our agricultural partners, with our other vendors, with our local community, do more and better by the environment.
Which is a great segue to your exciting new global platform, Made with Nature. What was the thinking behind this new platform, and what insights were you seeing along the way? Obviously, this goes back before pandemic kicked in. What
Yeah.
insights were you seeing about the customer that led you to that Made with Nature message?
Well, one of the conundrums Belvedere has long faced is that it's been a staple in the night, very big in nightclubs around the world. And, we also have this sort of artisanal craft background as well. We were just named a couple of weeks ago at the New York International Spirits Competition, best Polish vodka in the world and best rye vodka in the world.
Oh, congratulations.
So yeah, thanks. And you've got a ton of accolades from other competitions as well. So it kind of created a sort of duality in terms of, or conflict in terms of, are you sleek and chic and sexy in the night, or are you, craft, in your overalls, with dirt under your fingernails, toiling the earth in terms of craftsmanship. And I think what we did was to really take a step back, look at the DNA of the brand itself, really understand how we produce the product and how we connect with consumers. And then just decided, that the key point of commonality is this whole notion of that we're all natural, and that we just have two primary ingredients, rye and water, and we're distilled by fire, but nothing else. And we talk about trends that are happening now earlier, but one of the things that people are struggling with is really understanding what's truthful and what's not about communications in general, but also about brands.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought that stripping down everything we're communicating to the most elemental focus sense, rye, water, distilled by fire, made with nature, which is the campaign anthem, is the best way that we can really start a dialogue based on facts and truth about the consumer that should serve them in any occasion in which they consume Belvedere. So a lot of people are surprised, for instance, that Belvedere is gluten-free. And I've had not just consumers, but bartenders say to me, well, other brands say it on their label. And what we've said is, and explained on the website as well, is that all vodka that's distilled is gluten-free. Gluten is a pretty big molecule, and it's removed in the distillation process. And Belvedere goes through 4 distillation passes. But the Celiac Association of America on their website says, yes, any distilled spirit is gluten-free. And just last month, the FDA, for the first time, made a similar ruling that that distilled spirits and vodka in particular, even if they're based on wheat or based on rye, are gluten-free. Well, we find people don't know this yet. People don't appreciate that Belvedere is a non-GMO. Belvedere is kosher certified. So there's a lot of information about being natural that is engaging, it's informative, it's relevant, but most importantly, is true for the brand. And that's what we really want to focus on. And we think, even if you're in a hot nightclub and, it's a see and be seen scene.
When that happens again.
Yeah, when. We so hope it's sooner rather than later. But when that does happen, we think, it will matter to people when they look at a menu list in terms of what they're consuming, that there's a choice that, like Belvedere, that's all natural.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's almost like a wine pairing where you can pair Belvedere vodka with certain types of meals.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of our innovations, our recent innovations 2 years ago, was the launch of something called Single Estate series. So we launched 2 vodkas, both based on the same grain of Dankowski rye. Fabulous rye. You could bake bread with it. But we took the same rye, we planted it in one estate near the Baltics in the north of Poland, where the winters are severe and cold, and the rye really has to struggle to survive that cold climate. And we planted another in the west of Poland, where the continental Europe weather fronts are much warmer over the course of the winter. And if you've never had vodka in your life, you can taste the difference between these two vodkas. The one from the north is lighter, it's a little bit more floral, and the one from the west is, the rye is more hearty because the winter has been less severe.
It's interesting because you don't really think of vodka, you don't think of the words floral and vodka in the same sentence.
Or even terroir.
Or terroir, right,
terroir.
exactly.
And in all honesty,
that's wine. That's wine talk.
When we started developing this, that it was a viable concept, but in fact it has, and each of them have won double gold in two major spirits competitions: the Ultimate Spirits Challenge, which is the biggest bartender-led, bartender-juried competition in the world. And so we're very excited that these represent the pinnacle of our offerings, but that consumers are really seeing the parallel between terroir in vodka and terroir in wine. So it's coming. It's really coming. There's a whole evolution, we think, and the Heritage 176 and the whole malting rye and giving consumers a really, really different experience than what they've experienced before is something that we're excited to continue to do more of in the future. And we're able to do this because we have such a long tradition, being in a distillery operating for 110 years, but there's just such a great Polish history of 600 years of creating vodka.
Yeah, so really the point of difference here, simple ingredients, zero additives, mastery of crafting rye, really, seems like that's what sets Belvedere apart from the others.
Yes, and speaking with a true voice, and really giving back to the world in terms of nourishing the land, so important. So when you add that together, you create a sculpt, we think, that is fairly unique in the world of vodka and spirits. And we want to continue going forward, push this envelope and do some new and very different things. You asked earlier about the communications and campaign, and really for us, it's really our philosophy. It is our ethos. It is how we operate. But from a messaging standpoint, we've not told the story. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that Belvedere flavors, for instance, we make something called ginger zest, uses real ginger and real lemon zest to create the product. So where many of our competitors just used extracts and, off you go, we have huge vats and we cut up the whole fruit in the vats themselves, and they macerate with the alcohol to give it the flavor. We didn't do justice, I don't think, in terms of communicating that, but hopefully the whole Made with Nature platform going forward will allow us to engage consumers so they can better understand the commitment to quality and the craft that goes into producing Belvedere.
What channel are you going to push the Made with Nature message out in?
Well, for us, as I said, we consider it a platform in addition to just being a campaign. So, in addition to being on our own social media channels, as well as, Instagram and many places that are just familiar to everyone, we're also looking to communicate this across all touch points, including at retail, including in terms of the e-commerce venues. So, this is going to be our consistent mantra going forward, because there's so many interesting aspects about it to discuss and share that we think it can be really engaging.
Yeah, the campaign's beautiful. I saw some of the creative. So my final question, which I ask every guest, is the luxury item question. If you were stranded on a deserted island and you could only have one luxury item with you, what would that luxury item be? It can't be any form of air transportation or any transportation at all, or anything that requires mobile service. What would that one luxury item be?
My item would be, please don't laugh. Let me give you
you haven't heard some of the other answers in the past. So
maybe not.
Nothing will surprise me.
Well, in pre-pandemic, I would travel a week and a half to 2 weeks out of every month. And so, I'm always traveling someplace, and pretty regularly sleep deprived. Belvedere is sold in 120 countries, and we need to connect with all of our markets. So my luxury item where I stranded on an island would be a handcrafted mattress.
Wow.
And if you pressed me, I would tell you it would be McRoskey mattress from McRoskey's in San Francisco. They've been around since 1899. There's a plug for McRoskey's. But the mattresses are spectacular and really facilitate great sleep.
Hope you'd want a night mask with it too.
I'll take it.
Rodney, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Very informative. You were a great guest. And again, thank you so much.
Oh, Scott, thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.